my channel. This is the last video in the Unsolved Mysteries series for now because there are only 6 episodes so far on Netflix. More to come in October. It is also the last video that I'll be recording this week in Belgium because I am going home next week, which I'm actually really happy about. So, all my equipment is being packed up. So, yeah, the next video you see from me, I'll be back in my trusted filming location. So, episode 6 was about the disappearance of Lena Chapin, I think her name is pronounced. I watched this episode twice, but there were still details that I just didn't get. So I'm just going to talk through what I think it is, but feel free to leave in the comments if you understood it differently because there's parts about it that I'm unclear on. But anyway, Lena went missing in 2006. She was 24 at the time, I believe, and had a young son named Coulter. Now, Lena grew up very poor. She was the second oldest of 6 girls, so she had a lot of siblings. And they interviewed 2 of her sisters for this episode called, where did I write down their names? Robin and Brandy. Brandy was the oldest, and so she said that they grew up very poor, but their mother made sure that they were never short on anything. She worked multiple jobs. She made sure that they always had a good life. And a lot of this episode is about the mother, but Brandy said she always remembers her mother that way, and that's the mother that she really misses, but she turned into another person as time went on. Lena was known to be very outspoken, had a smart mouth on her, fought quite a bit with her sisters, got into trouble at school, and was kind of the leader of the group. Like, her sisters believe that if she hadn't stepped up multiple times during their childhood to make sure that they all stayed together, they might have all been sent to different foster homes. So when the girls were a little bit older, but still little, I think like when Brandy was probably 10 or 11, their mother really started dating a lot of different men, and not just dating, marrying a lot of different men. She really used her sex appeal to seduce men, and she would constantly float from one man to the other. So they moved house a lot. I forgot to write down all the dates for this because there were so many. To be honest, I didn't forget. There were so many that I was like, I'm not going to write them all down. But to tell this story, maybe I should have now. She married a man named Albert, I think, in 1992 or 1993. Because she was married to him for about 3 years. The girls loved him. They said that he was really chill, really laid back, but a great stepfather. He did a lot with them and they really liked him. However, while she was married to Albert, Sandy, the mother, started an affair with Albert's brother Gary. And she married Gary in 1999. So I think she married Albert around 1990. She married Gary in 1996. I think she married Albert around 1992 or 3. It's in the episode. I just forgot. And then with Gary was less laid back than Albert. He owned a farm and he made the girls work really hard and take care of the animals. But the girls actually really loved him. They They said that they learned a lot from him. They learned a lot of discipline from him. And honestly, taking care of the animals is something they really loved doing. I didn't have the impression that Albert had any ill will towards his brother. He said that they definitely fought and had like a fist fight over this. But ultimately, Albert was like, I'm done. Like, just take her. But I mean, I just find it, and I know it happens a lot, I just find it so strange that as a brother, you would run off with your brother's wife. Like, I just can't imagine that you do something. Like, in my family, I can't imagine that you would, but whatever. So, in 1999, again, 3 years later, Sandy starts an affair with a man named Chris in March of 1999. 2 months later, in May of 1999, Gary disappears. At first, his disappearance was reported by a cousin. They called the sheriff's department and were like, my cousin, it seems to be gone. We haven't seen him in a while. And so the sheriff went over to Sandy's house to talk to her. And she's like, yeah, I haven't seen him in a couple of days. He took off to go buy chickens in another town and just never came back. And police was like, well, wouldn't you file a missing persons report? And she was like, yeah, I guess I better do that. So she filed a missing persons report because police asked her to. They then searched the house. There was no sign at all that Gary had ever lived there. Not only did they not find Gary, they didn't find any of his possessions, any of his clothes, just no sign of him. They asked Sandy to take a polygraph test, and she said, if you find a body, I'll take a polygraph. So, it's kind of sketchy. Now, Brandy, the oldest sister, said that the day that Gary disappeared, her and her sisters came home from school, and her mom was waiting at the door and said a cat had kittens out in the field, go look for them. But Brandy was supposed to go milk the cows, so she stayed on the porch waiting because her mom wouldn't let her in the house. But she needed all her tools and stuff to milk the cows, and she got kind of tired of waiting, so she just opened the front door and found her mom on her hands and knees scrubbing the floor with bleach. Now, Brandy didn't really, she said it was odd. She'd never seen her mom do that before, but she wasn't really thinking anything of it. She just ran out to get her things and then went to the cows. And then later that night, Robin, the other sister, saw out her bedroom window that Sandy and Chris were struggling with something really big, like trying to move something really big, and they had a hard time doing it, and she knew that it was Gary, but she couldn't see that it was Gary. She just knew, but she obviously was really young and didn't want to tell anyone. After all of this, as she got older, Lena kind of went off the rails a little bit. Initially, when she started going out with friends and stuff, she wouldn't do drugs. She wouldn't even drink alcohol. But as she got a little older, she started taking drugs and doing alcohol. She started feeling very lonely. She was around 17 at this time, and her sister said she was clearly struggling with something and needed to talk to someone to get it off her chest. So eventually, when she was 17, Lena went to visit Albert, the first stepfather, and she confessed to him that her mother killed Gary. She said that he was sitting on the couch and her mother came up from behind and shot him 2 or 3 times in the back of the head. And that Lena, and this is the part where I'm confused on because I rewatched it, but I was still confused about it. Lena was apparently home at this time, witnessed everything, and while the other girls came home and Sandy sent them away, she told Lena to wait in the bedroom with Gary's body because she had dragged the body to the bedroom. I'm not sure why Lena was home. she was the second oldest, so I can't imagine that she came home from school earlier than Brandy, who was the oldest. But they either skimmed over this or I missed it twice, but I couldn't figure out if they all came home from school right after this happened while Lena was home. She was 13 at the time, so not entirely sure why she was home. But anyway, she told Albert that they took his body and burned it, and that there is, like, they moved buckets of the remains and, like, strewed the ashes everywhere. Like, there was nothing left of his remains. Now, Sandy found out that Lena had made this confession to Albert and hired a lawyer, and they essentially made Lena recant her confession. They put a lot of pressure on her, and she recanted it. Then Lena eventually confessed to Brandy what happened. Like, they were sisters, she confided in her. And Brandy the next day got into a huge fight with her mom and let it slip, kind of. She said, I know what you did, I'm going to tell. And Sandy said to her daughter, get in the car. Her and her boyfriend Chris drove Brandy out pretty far, and then they made her get out of the car. There was a truck. She was in the bed of the truck. They made her get out, and Chris took out a gun and pointed it at her. Now she didn't know what to do. She said, I looked at my mom. She was sitting in the passenger seat, completely emotionless, staring out in front of her. I couldn't get through to her. I begged not to hurt me, but she wasn't reacting. She said, so I thought of the only thing that I could do at that moment, is she opened the car door and jumped into her mother's lap, because at least then Chris couldn't, had to shoot them both, essentially. She said, and I just pleaded and said, Mom, don't let him hurt me, and hugged her really tight and cried. She said it took about 10 or 20 seconds before her mother said, don't hurt my baby. And they all drove back home together. I cannot, twice I watched it, and twice I thought how incredibly scary that must have been for Brandy. The entire way home, sitting on her mother's lap, knowing that they could still kill her any second, because that was obviously their plan. So, can't imagine it. She also said that up until that point, she didn't believe her mother could ever hurt anyone, because even after Lena told her the story, I don't think she fully believed it until that incident happened. A few years went by. None of them ever spoke of it again. Brandy was too afraid. Lena, after recanting her confession, was too scared to talk about it again, so it all stayed pretty quiet. Now, in 2003, Coulter was born, her son. I think it was actually, God, I'm getting confused on my dates. I think it was also in 2003 that she told Albert this, because as I remember from the episode, she had her son only about 6 months later, I think. So she was 17 when her son was born. And then, like I said, a few years went by. Nobody ever talked about it. And then in 2006, Lena had a boyfriend. She was really happy. She had her son. She worked more jobs than she could handle because she wanted to be a good mom and she wanted to provide everything she could for her son. But she was planning to marry her boyfriend, move in with him, and essentially become financially independent from her mother. Now, this really threatened Sandy, because if Lena became completely independent from her and didn't need her anymore, then there was nothing really stopping her from going back to police and telling them the story about Gary. And 2006 then that Lena disappeared. Her boyfriend said that her mom came over to tell him that Lena had met another boyfriend and that she moved with him to Florida and that she wasn't coming back. I found it interesting that the boyfriend just believed it because they were planning to get married. Like, I would think you'd know her a little bit better, but he seemed to believe it. However, Brandy never believed it. Brandy said that she knew her sister really well. There was no other boyfriend. She didn't take any of her belongings with her, and most importantly, she left Coulter behind, and she would never have left without her son, ever. Around this time, because they couldn't file charges against Sandy for killing Gary because they had no evidence and Lena recanted her confession, the family brought forth a civil lawsuit. Now, they were hoping that Lena could give her testimony in exchange for immunity because she was only 13 at the time, that they wouldn't punish her for her involvement in it, but in exchange she'd have to re-give a testimony in court. Because of that, Sandy most likely wanted to make Lena disappear because if she's not there, she can't give a witness statement. During the trial, all her children, as far as I know, went to court and testified against their mom, but Lena's confession tape was not allowed to be used. Now, they did find them guilty of wrongful death towards Gary, and they were made to pay his family $7 million in damages, which they have not seen a cent of yet. So, when Lena disappeared, Robin, one of her sisters, went around town hanging up missing persons flyers of her, and Sandy actually paid her youngest daughter $5 to take all of them down, which you don't do for your own kid. Like, she didn't want her missing daughter's flyers up. She had them all taken down. And apparently she was also obsessed with Coulter because she had 6 girls, and as soon as she found out that Lena was having a boy, she was like she wanted that boy. She actually made him call her mom, even when Lena was still alive. So she really, really wanted Coulter for herself. And after the lawsuit, yes, they were found guilty, but it was a civil lawsuit, meaning they can't get an actual jail punishment for it, just pay damages. A few years later anyway, she divorced Chris, she remarried someone else, and she is currently, years later, still raising Coulter. She went to court to file abandonment charges against her daughter, and of course, because Lena didn't show up to court, the judge thought, well, yeah, she is abandoning her child, and assigned parental rights over to Sandy. So, that is what there is. I'm sorry, I feel like this was a bit confusing because my notes were a little bit all over the place, I think, but essentially, I think it's very clear to everyone involved, and especially to Lena's sisters, that her mother killed her to cover up the fact that she killed Gary. Apparently, Gary had a bunch of, had proof against her that she had written a bunch of fraudulent checks and was threatening to make that public. And she killed him. Lena was there, saw it happen, and later in life, she killed Lena, and probably not just to cover that up, but also for the fact that she wanted her son, which is kind of sick if you think about it. I mean, it's it's ultimately her daughter's son, and she wanted to raise it as her own son, which is creepy as anything. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a lot of thoughts about it, to be honest. I fully believe that she killed her. But they showed, so the daughters were given permission of the new owners to search two properties that Sandy and Chris lived together to find or to look for Lena's body. And they didn't find her there. But I find it interesting that they're looking for a body because, in my opinion, if they burned Gary, they would have also burned Lena. Like, they did it the first time, got away with it. We're like, hey, nobody ever found a trace of this. Let's just do it again. So, I don't think they're ever going to find her. I hope they do. Because without her remains, they'll probably never be able to convict Sandy of this. But, I just don't think they will. Brandy has said that she'll never stop trying to get Coulter out of there, and that at the very least, once he's an adult, they're going to tell him the truth about what happened. But I don't know. It's going to be weird for him. They haven't seen him since he was in kindergarten. So unless he was homeschooled for a long time, so he wouldn't find out from the public what was going on. But I imagine that he believes Sandy is his mother and that he doesn't know anything else, really. So if he ever finds out this story, and he will, someone, even if it's not his own family, someone will tell him. It's going to be a really big shock to him. Yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say. I don't have children, so I don't understand the bond that a mother has with her child. But I do understand that it's normally so strong that you can't kill your own child. Like, you hear family dramas of parents killing their children and committing suicide, and that's one thing because that usually precedes a psychotic break. And you don't see another way out. But she literally just killed her daughter, grabbed her son, and moved on with her life. And I find it horrific to think about that a person could do something like that. And clearly, like, almost killed her other daughter too, so clearly has no issues killing her own children. I just find it, like, horrific to think about. So yeah, that is it. Next episode's coming in October, and